It's time for my September mid-month wrap-up. That is to say, all the books that I read during the first half of September. So stick around to see what they are. Hey friends, Roger here, and welcome to my channel, Roger's Reads. So today I'm doing the first part of my September wrap-up. These are all the books that I've read thus far in September. Well, I should say up to the 15th. And all the books that I'm talking about are part of the Monster-a-thon read-along that I'm doing this month. Though I haven't been very good about vlogging or doing the extra challenges because I've been out of town a good portion of the month. So, should have known better to try to do something like that in September, one of my busiest months. But anyway, I digress. So let's get cracking with the wrap-up. So the first book that I read was entitled The Night Tiger. This is written by Youngsti Chu. So the story takes place in Malaya during the 1930s and opens to a scene in which Dr. McFarlane, the employer of an orphaned Chinese houseboy named Ren, is about to die. But before passing, the doctor makes one final request of the boy, of Ren, that he find his missing severed finger that was lost years ago and reunite it with his body. Now there's a strong sense of urgency here, as Ren only has 49 days to complete the task. If he fails, his master spirit will roam the earth forever, unable to rest. So Ren then arrives at the home of a less than respectable surgeon, William Acton, with a letter of recommendation from Dr. McFarlane, who told Ren, before his death, that he believed Acton would still have the finger that was amputated during an exploration years before. But Ren needs to find the finger on his own and must not mention it to Acton or mention his reasons for being there. So then we meet a different character, a young woman named Ji Ling, who, though she has dreams of becoming a nurse, works instead as an apprentice dressmaker to adhere to her oppressive and abusive stepfather's demands. Now, because of her mother's gambling debts, however, Ji Lin also moonlights as a dance hall girl to help pay those debts off. So one evening, Ji Lin is dancing with a man and accidentally takes a small container from his pocket, only to discover later on that the object is a test tube in which is a shriveled, severed finger.
No, please!
So we can only assume that this is the finger that Ren must find, and that now her fate will be linked to Ren's. So desperate to get rid of it, she enlists the help of her stepbrother Shin to help get the digit to its rightful owner. Now there's also the fact that there's a tiger prowling the town, which is blamed for several bizarre deaths that have occurred recently in the village. There are some who believe that the creature is in fact a were-tiger, a creature of Chinese superstition that has the ability to shapeshift into human form. So this is kind of the opposite of a werewolf, because here we have an animal that shifts into a human form rather than the other way around. So at some point in the story, all three of their lives intertwine, the boy, the girl, and the tiger, creating a danger for our two main characters. And you know, this was such an atmospheric book with beautiful imagery, and the author really has a knack for sucking you right into the story. I thought that this was a lovely, adventurous, Asian-inspired fantasy steeped with mythology, and it was a blast to read with its blend of historical fiction, magical realism, mystery, possible murder, and even a touch of romance, though the romance was a bit strange, to be sure. But I really ended up enjoying the book. So the next book that I read was entitled Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. And I actually consumed this as an audiobook, and so I don't have a physical copy of it, but I'll put the book cover right up there. So I've been wanting to read this for quite some time, and luckily this was my in-person book club's selection for last month, so it was the perfect opportunity to read it. So this is a fascinating book that takes place during the 1950s and 60s and follows a misunderstood girl named Kaya Clark, who is also known as the Marsh Girl or Marsh Trash by the local people in Barclay Cove. So Kaya is abandoned as a little girl First by her mother, then by all of her siblings, and finally by her drunken and abusive father, leaving her to fend for herself all alone on the marsh, without assistance from anyone. I think that she was 10 years old or so when the last of her family finally abandoned her. So the story is told in two alternate timelines. The first focusing on Kaya's life in the marsh and her eventual romantic involvement with two young men from town. The other timeline takes place in 1969, in which a young man named Chase Andrews is found dead. At first, police think it was an accident, but upon further investigation, began to suspect that the young man was in fact murdered. So the townies immediately suspect the strange and aloof marsh girl, especially given that she has been seen several times over the years in Chase's company. Now, this is another one of those books that's super haunting, atmospheric, and the rich, vivid descriptions of the soggy swamps, the birds, insects, water, sand, mud, plants, fish, and other animals really transport you right back into the 1950s and make you feel as though that you're right in the marsh along with Kaya. So while this is a lovely homage to nature, it's also a moving and heartbreaking coming-of-age story about a resilient young woman who had to overcome abandonment, prejudice, scorn, and immense loneliness, and how a person can rise above their circumstances when people believe in you. So Where the Crawdads Sing, it's a character-driven story with an admirable and tenacious heroine that is part mystery, part love story, part suspense, and part adventure. It was really an engrossing story that I absolutely loved, and one that I will no doubt contemplate for a long time to come. Now, what's interesting about this book is that every single person in my book club loved it, which is very unusual because there are very few books that I recall where there's been unanimous approval. But yeah, Where the Crawdads Sing, I highly recommend it. Definitely a 5-star read for me. So the next book that I read for Monstrous of this month was entitled The Rest of Us Just Live Here by Patrick Ness. So most of the books that I've read by Patrick Ness have been a bit on the odd side, and this one was no exception. So, how to describe this book? Well, it follows a senior in high school named Mikey and his group of friends who, as the book points out, are not the chosen ones. But there is another group of kids whom everyone else in the school refers to as the indie kids, and these are the chosen ones. Now, these are the kids with names like Satchel, Finn, and Dylan, and they are the ones who have to fight the vampires, zombies, and soul-eating ghosts and other paranormal threats that face the town. And sometimes these indie kids end up dying in the process. So these are people like Katniss Everdeen, Harry Potter, Buffy Summers and the Scooby Gang, Percy Jackson, the Avengers, Luke Skywalker, and the like. But this book, this story, is not about them. It's about the other people who live in town, the ones who aren't the chosen ones, but who have to attend the same school as them and witness the horrors that they sometimes have to face. So there are really two main storylines going on here. At the beginning of each chapter, there's a couple of sentence synopsis of the current danger facing the indie kids and as they protect the town from destruction. And let me find the beginning of a chapter. So here we have. So this part here is just a little synopsis of what the indie kids are going through, and then we move on to the rest of the story. Now the rest of the story, or the rest of the chapters, are told from Mikey's point of view as he and his friends try to finish off their senior year without getting killed. Of course, the two storylines overlap, including encounters with zombie deer, bombs, glowing blue lights, etc. So though they aren't the chosen ones, Mikey's circle of friends really aren't as normal as he would have us think, given that one of his friends is the god of cats. Yes, the god of cats. So the story is kind of a blend between contemporary fiction, fantasy, with a playful nod to the Chosen One genre, and I thought it was big fun. So in one part of the story, there were these strange lights going off over the city. One of Mikey's friends says something to the effect of, I wonder if the indie kids are taking care of that. So in this way, I thought that the premise was so fresh and creative, and I love how the story focused on the regular kids, the muggles as it were, and not the special and or gifted ones. There is also excellent mental health representation in the story, as we have a character with Alzheimer's, one with an eating disorder, and another character with OCD. From what I read, the representation seemed to be respectful and spot on. The story also explores issues of unrequited love, of friendship, family dynamics, and finding your place in the world. So what we have here then is a clever and unique story with quirky, diverse characters and an intriguing setting. The story was a lot of fun with plenty of laughs and thrills throughout. And I ended up giving this 4 stars. So the next book that I read during the month of September, and another selection for Monstrathon, was Something Strange and Deadly by Susan Dennard. So this is a young adult Victorian steampunk / urban fantasy story that follows a proper high society young woman named Eleanor Fitt. So she's at the depot waiting for her brother Elijah to return when the dead bell rings. So that means when the dead bell rings, that means that the dead are rising and attacking in Philadelphia. So much to Eleanor's horror, a zombie finds her inside the depot and instead of attacking her, delivers her a letter from her brother Elijah, informing her that he is stuck in New York and can only come home if he does what someone else needs. And the letter is very vague on that. So from the letter though, it's clear that whoever is controlling the zombies, given that the zombie brought her the letter, is holding her brother prisoner. So Eleanor decides to take on the task of fighting her brother, and to do so she enlists the help of notorious spirit hunters who supposedly are there to protect the city from supernatural forces, though we're not really sure at this point whether they are legitimate and or can be trusted, though they do have some pretty clever steampunk-like devices for battling the undead. So along with the spirit hunters, Eleanor searches for the necromancer, the one who's controlling the zombie army and the one who no doubt has her brother. So this was quite an action-packed story with a decent storyline, but it wasn't quite what I was expecting. There was actually quite little focus on the zombies, and I would like to have actually seen more zombie action. And they weren't really even true zombies. They're basically reanimated corpses brought back by black magic and being controlled by a necromancer. But I did like the premise of the young adult Victorian steampunkish urban fantasy. I thought that this aspect of it was a lot of fun, even though the story ended up being somewhat predictable, with only a minority of it focused on the undead. But the story was pretty fast-paced with plenty of oddball characters and a riveting ending. But at the end of the day, there was something lacking in it for me. I guess I expected more zombies and more thrills, both of which I felt were lacking in the story. And I'm guessing that I'm probably not the intended audience for this novel. Now, this is the first book in a series, a trilogy, I think, but it's one that I probably won't be continuing. I'm just not invested enough in this world or the characters, and I ended up giving this 3 stars. So the fifth and final book that I read during the first half of August was entitled Rattle Bones by S.M. Parker. So this is a super atmospheric ghost story that follows a young woman named Rila Bray who has recently lost her father and is struggling with her grief as well as her uncertain future. So the story takes place in a small Maine fishing village community, and visible to the town is a mysterious uninhabited island. So one night, Rila sees an apparition of a ghostly girl floating over the nearby island, and her haunting yet somehow somewhat familiar song reaches Rila, and she finds it enticing as though it's beckoning her. So the ghost's pull grows ever stronger, and intrigued, Rila boats over to the island. So there she meets a human young man named Sam, who's a university student who's in the process of excavating the island and searching for clues about the island people who were evicted from the island 80 years prior. Now all this is news to her, as Rila has never heard of anyone living on the island, and she's determined and excited to investigate the island's history along with Sam. So bit by bit, the island's horrifying past and a tragedy that has been kept secret finally comes to light. A tragedy that has a strong connection to Rila's own past and family. So there's really a lot going on with this story. There's a long-held secrets, grief, loss. There's a mystery to solve. There's a struggle between tradition and moving forward, the connection between past and present. There's the horror of racial prejudice, and even a touch of romance. And given that this is a ghost story, there's a delightful creep factor to it as well. You know, it was so much fun journeying with Rila as she began to uncover the island's strange and unsettling past and discover herself in the process. It's also an excellent example how an unnerving and distressing past can end up resounding right into the present in a variety of different ways. And as it did so in this story, the suspense built page after page. Now, one of the things I loved most about this book was the way that the author developed the mystery, then slowly weaved together the strands, bringing the characters closer to each other in the process. I found this to be really an atmospheric book that is vibrant with life, rich in culture, and yet is followed by haunting shadows that make your spine tingle. So all in all, it was an enjoyable read, and I ended up giving this 4 stars. And the 6th book that I read this month, I thought there were only 5, but there were actually 6 that I read through the first half, was entitled The Chalk Man, written by C.J. Tudor. So this is a book whose premise intrigued me right from the get-go, especially the Stranger Things vibe that the story had. So this follows Eddie Adams, also known as Eddie Munster, and his group of friends. And the narrative jumps back and forth between 2 different timelines, both told from Eddie's point of view. So in the 1986 timeline, Eddie is a 12-year-old kid, and the kids spend their days riding their bikes around town and leaving little chalk stick figure messages for each other, messages that only they can understand. But things change for Eddie and his friends one day, when a stick figure leads them to a dismembered body of a young woman. This, however, is only one of the tragedies that tore the community apart that summer for Eddie and his friends. So lots of bad things happen, and the small town where Eddie lives is filled with secrets, lies, hypocrisy, and some pretty nasty characters as well. So 30 years later, in 2016, Eddie is now fully grown. Now what's interesting about this timeline is that we get to see how the events that took place 30 years prior affect Eddie and his friends in the present day. So as for Eddie, he's a teacher, and lives with a rather odd roommate. He drinks too much, and he thinks he's put that horrible past behind him. But one day he receives an anonymous letter in the mail containing a single chalk figure. And as it turns out, his friends receive the same letter. So at first they assume that it's only a prank until one of them turns up dead. It becomes clear then that it's not a prank and that the past has come back to haunt them. So Eddie soon finds himself thrust into a 30-year-old mystery. So I thought that the author really did an excellent job of juggling the two timelines here. And you know, this method doesn't always work well in novels, I find, but Tudor managed to expertly pull it off in a perfectly paced narrative. She also managed to give us a fantastic set of characters in a convincing small-town setting to both fascinate us and distract us. You know, I enjoyed the curious references surrounding the mysterious Chalk Man throughout the story, which added to the plot's intrigue. So this is definitely one of those stories where you should assume nothing and trust no one, which is one of my favorite tropes. So this results in quite an addicting and unique story with captivating situations, but also some great twists along the way. And the fast-paced storyline kept me utterly engaged until the climactic ending. Now, speaking of the ending, though surprising, you know, I just couldn't buy into it. It felt just a little over the top to me, resulting in a badly needed eye roll. So though I enjoyed the story and the characters, the outrageous ending caused me to knock off a star. But still, I found the Chalk Man to be a thrilling and engaging tale with plenty of surprises. It was dark and sinister with gobs of creepiness and secrets. And I ended up giving this 4 stars. So that is my September wrap-up, part 1. Have you read anything good so far in September? If so, let me know in the comments. That about does it. As always, I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support. And if you like this video, I'd really appreciate if you click the like button below, as it really helps my channel out. I will talk to you all in the next video. Roger and out.